Okay, so now I have the pleasure to introduce Peter Euler, who is going to give the first keynote of the day, the opening keynote. Peter Euler holds a professorship for business education and educational management and serves as a director of the Institute of Business Education and Educational Management at the University of St.Gallen. He has published extensively in the fields of business education, educational management and university development, focusing on social competences, innovations in teaching and learning, and quality development. So here we go, and the topic is, title, very precise, is Responsibility and Sustainability, a Demanding Challenge for Higher Education. The floor is yours.
Yeah, good morning everybody. Responsibility and sustainability. And I think it's quite easy to make this topic difficult. Because as we know, there are thousands of reasons and objections when we talk about educating responsible leaders at universities. But I was told to remain constructive and not just point to the challenges, but also point to or indicate the ways ahead. And that's what I'm going to do now. I would like to start off by a very concrete experience I had quite some years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. I found a letter in my mailbox, and I could read as follows. One of the students told me that, regarding some of my fellow students, I feel an attitude and spirit which makes me worried and angry. Ethics and social responsibility are shrugged off and deemed to be naive and completely irrelevant. When ethical issues were raised in one of the lectures, many students left the lecture hall with ostentation because they felt this is absolute nonsense. Rather, unconditional profit maximization is the guiding principle. Those who question it will be laughed at. The vision of our university clearly calls for educating students in responsible behavior. While this value is a high priority on paper, we fall short of implementing it in practice. Those students who don't care can easily walk away from topics such as ethics or responsibility. A very pessimistic statement, but I found some more basic messages in this email. One is, of course, some students don't care on responsibility. But the other side of the coin is some students do. And they are so active that they even send an email and they reflect on it. And they feel worried and angry. They have emotions on it. And I feel that's a very positive indicator. Secondly, a lot of courses already address issues of responsible leadership at my university. Otherwise, this couldn't have happened here. On the other hand, the impact of such endeavors, of such efforts in these courses is quite open, it's quite ambivalent. So it's a typical yes, but question, and that, I would say, is a good starting point for a conference. To become more structured, I would like to address 5 basic questions. First of all, I would like to address some assumptions, because I feel there are many misconceptions around which should be cleared up right at the beginning. Then I would like to address the objective of courses of teaching and learning on the program and on the course level, and ask the question, what do we expect students to learn on responsible leadership? Then I would like to turn to the program level and ask, how can responsible leadership issues be incorporated into study programs? I then move on to the course level, to the micro level of teaching and learning, and ask what obstacles are to overcome, but also what concepts are available. So what obstacles we have to address on the one hand, but on the other hand, what experience we can already draw on and use for designing learning environments in this field. And finally, I would like to turn to the institutional level and ask how can change processes towards responsible leadership be facilitated. Let's turn to the assumptions, and I would like to confine myself on 4 different ones. First one is, and Thomas already addressed that issue, value-free teaching is impossible. At universities, scholars tend to avoid values. They talk about value-free research, and some of them, at least implicitly, have an understanding of teaching that it's also value-free. Thomas already pointed out that there are values embedded in any kind of teaching. I would like to illustrate that by an example. I was observing a colleague of mine at this university, and in one of his lectures he introduced a case study. And he was just introducing it by saying, imagine there's a big company, you are the CEO of this company, and this company ran into deep waters. They faced a tough time on the market. Sales decreased, profits dropped, and you have to dismiss 1,000 employees. So think about how to do that best, according to the labor law, according to HR principles. And that was the starting point of this lesson, and it was done on a high level of expertise. They draw on relevant HR theories, they made some references to labor law, but within this whole unit, they didn't address at 1 second value issues. Although it's quite obvious that this is a case where values are heavily involved. And that's to some extent typical for teaching and learning at universities in many cases. But it starts from the assumption that values don't have a place in teaching. My understanding is you can't avoid values, and you just have the choice between addressing them consciously and explicitly, or addressing them unconsciously and implicitly. In any case, you draw on value issues when you do teaching. A related question to that is, how do you introduce values? And one issue which also creates a lot of misconceptions is that once you address values, you enter the field of value imposition. So the teachers tell students how to behave. And of course, that is not the case. There's no brain or greenwashing intended. Developing responsible behavior doesn't force students to follow specific values or to adopt specific attitudes, but to be more aware and reflective on this dimension of human behavior. So it's about reflecting on values, but not adopting values from teachers. Third one, many teachers, many colleagues say, well, I'm quite willing to enter this field, but I don't know how to do it. I think that's a serious objection, that's a serious comment. But I would say the future is already there, but it's not everywhere. We have good practices. We can draw on existing experiences in this field, but we need to dig them out. And I think it's a matter of designing change process to dig them out in a way that they are available to most of the faculty. And the fourth one, and I feel this is a very important issue, there are heterogeneous starting points with teachers and students. I can come back to this email, which shows that students have different points of view, different perspectives on the issues. Some feel it's very important, others feel you should skip it at the university. So on the part of the students, it's a very heterogeneous situation. The same is true on the part of the teachers. Some teachers feel it's highly important, others try to avoid it, they feel uncomfortable in this area, and they are not really keen on entering this field. So these are the assumptions, and if we base our considerations on these assumptions, I feel we can become quite creative and quite innovative. One question we should consider right at the start is, what are the relevant objectives when we enter the field of responsible leadership? And I guess in all our vision and mission statements at universities, we have some references to this issue. At least our university has some very explicit statements, and we did a lot to really make that quite outspoken. But I feel it's not enough to phrase some nice programmatic ambitions into the university's vision. Nobody would object because nobody is forced to change anything. The vision is just on paper, and the vision just becomes real life if it's boiled down to learning objectives. And when we boil it down to learning objectives on the program level and on the course level, we have to make up our mind what specific objectives do we want to address. And I feel there are at least 5 different objectives we can consider, and related to different disciplines and related to different states of expertise in the field. We can probably start off by firstly clarifying existing values practiced by individuals and groups. Think back of this case introduction. Here in that case we could have clarified what underlying values are in place when we talk about dismissal of employees. Then we can reflect on the consequences of decisions for different stakeholders. We can extend the perspectives when we look into specific cases, not just taking an economic point of view, but also taking a social point of view, taking a psychological point of view, taking other point of views. Then we can discuss moral dilemma. In most cases we have the option of adopting different kind of values, and the challenge here would be to really come to a trade-off between the different values, and that means discussing moral dilemma situations. Then we can reflect on alternative behavior. What is common sense, what is common practice, but what else could be done? I think universities don't have just to address issues as they are, but they also have to address issues as they can be. And that's something we can introduce in this area, definitely. And finally, justifying your own decision, and that means taking responsibility. Taking a decision, finding reasons for this decision, justify it, and that ultimately means taking responsibility. So, when we boil it down into more concrete steps, we can then address the curriculum area and ask how can responsible leadership issues be incorporated into study programs. And here we have a lot of options around, and I would like to distinguish 2 different levels. I would like to distinguish between the organizational and the curriculum level. On the organizational level, and this is what this ladder means, we can first of all harvest the low-hanging fruits and then move on to harvesting the high-hanging fruits. Low-hanging fruits on the organization level means to organize, to introduce, to offer elective courses. This means still we delegate the whole issue to the experts in the field, to those who deal with ethics, those who deal with normative ethics, those who deal with business ethics. So it's delegated to the experts, and it's quite an ambivalent strategy. On one hand, it's in good hands because they are experts, they can do it on a high level of expertise. On the other hand, they can exculpate the others to step back and not getting involved in the whole issue. So that's can only be a starting point. It can only be the first step. One further step could be to make these courses compulsory to the students, still separated from the core courses. So students perceive it probably, okay, we have to take this course, we have to face this issue, we have to deal with it, but there are two worlds around. There's the ethics world and there's the disciplinary world. And of course, in many cases, they have a clear perspective on it. The disciplinary world is much more valuable, it's much more important for them than the ethics world. So the high-hanging fruits then, most ambitious, but also most rewarding, is coming up with the integration into core courses. Integrate with an ethics consideration into disciplinary consideration. And on the practical level, that could mean that you have to organize different types of team teaching. A less demanding implementation would be to have an additive team teaching, so you split the course into two halves or into pieces, and one part of it is done by the ethics expert and the other part is done by the disciplinary expert. Of course, they have some kind of integration by linking their presentations to each other, but it's still additive. And the cooperative kind of team teaching means that it's a coherent whole, it's one coherent unit, and it's really incorporated into the course. That's the organizational level. On the curriculum level, you also have low and high-hanging fruits. The low-hanging fruits address these issues by just introducing new content. It's new content, it's new knowledge on ethics. So you bring some additional information. It's still transmission of knowledge. It's not touching the doing, the being component of human behavior. It's still confining teaching to the knowledge component. And of course, the high-hanging fruits then would go further and combine knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Knowing, doing, and being. Again, this is more demanding, but also it can be more rewarding. And out of our projects, we feel that there's a high heterogeneity when it comes to teachers. Many are open-minded to the high-hanging fruits. Some are just saying, well, at best we can reach the lower levels, so it's a path for change, so to speak. So the main actors, of course, are the teachers in this field. The ultimate actors, of course, are the students, that's for sure, but the main actors for changing things are the teachers, of course. And as I already pointed out, there's a high degree of heterogeneity in that area. In terms of being able to teach responsible leadership issues, and also in terms of being willing to teach it. And what does that mean if you have this heterogeneity? It means you can't just come up with a one-fits-all approach in introducing new learning and teaching concepts. You have to have low and you have to have high threshold concepts. You have to have concepts which are which are applicable for those who are willing but less able, and you also have to come up with some concepts for those who have already built up some expertise, who want to refine, who want to extend their knowledge, they want to expand their teaching competences, but you have to have a very heterogeneous concepts in order to serve the different basics. And the optimistic part of it is that you can already draw on quite a number of good practices well-done experiences on two levels. You have concepts which function on a principle basis, like experiential learning, following the POLT concept, reflective learning approaches, problem-based learning approaches, service learning approaches. I don't want to go into that here. Probably some of the workshops, all these concepts will be addressed. And some of these concepts related to specific principles are boiled down to specific methods. The collaboratories concept is a very powerful concept to combine analytical aspects with innovative, creative aspects, and doing things and building up prototypes for future behavior. Moral dilemma discussions, a very old but still powerful concept in education to address value conflicts. Field projects. So a lot of methods are around, and all of these methods are built on specific components. And the major components are just outlined in this graph here. Basically, it has a strong element of reflection, but it also, and Thomas already pointed it out, it needs some exposure to experience. Practical experience. Experiences can be brought into the classroom in many different ways. You can send out students into practice and let them collect experience, let them take up experience in order to reflect it in the classroom. You can bring it in by guest speakers, by visitors, many ways to make students exposed to experiences. But a further component is to bring in emotions and affection, because change is inevitably related on reflect on emotions, reflect on values, reflect on normative behavior. And of course you need also space and room for experimenting, for doing things. These major components can be organized, can be designed in a very flexible way. Let's say there are teachers around who are very strong in facilitating reflections. So you can start off here and extend his strength by introducing other components. It means that other teachers are already very strong, very proficient in bringing practical experiences into the classroom, into the university. So you can build on this and then extend these strengths to other components. So it's a good framework to start off where teachers are and then extend it to those areas which are necessary to come up with a comprehensive approach of responsible leadership education by extending it step by step to the other issues. And this graph catches this basic consideration in a different way. If you try to introduce new concept of responsible leadership, you have to start with the existing teaching and learning practices. It doesn't make sense to start off by any idealistic, ultimate vision. You have to start where teachers are. And in most cases, as we know, teaching capabilities are not extremely extended, to be a bit, to express it in a rather moderate way. Teachers are not always very proficient in facilitating interaction. They are not very proficient in addressing underlying value issues, as we already heard several times. So start off with the disciplinary expertise they have, but then ask them what new questions can be raised in the disciplinary context. That would be probably the starting point. So in the example of the case I just talked about earlier, just ask them, how could employees feel when they are facing this situation? Those employees who are about to be sacked, and those employees who have the privilege to stay on in the company? What does it mean to the customers? What does it mean to other stakeholders? So extend the perspective to other views, to other questions, and then extend the perspective on specific disciplinary issues. Then you can extend the context. You can introduce different consideration. You can extend it by new method. You can ask the what-if question. What happens if things were different? And of course, you can, in the end, come up with multidisciplinary perspectives. So there may be a path of progression in introducing responsible leadership issue into the curriculum. Finally, what about change processes? How can change processes towards responsible leadership be facilitated? I think that's a topic on its own sake, of course. I would just point out 4 different statements. Part of them conclude what I've already said, part of them address the change issue. Educating responsible leaders is a demanding challenge for universities because it requires continuous corresponding efforts and interventions on 3 levels. So it's not just an intervention you can introduce in one of your courses and then think that things have considerably changed. It's a coherent, a comprehensive approach, and you have to address this issue on different levels, on the course level, on the program level, and on the institutional level. For many universities and academics, this is a fundamental change because it is contrary to the notion and self-concept of university education. That makes it highly exciting, that makes it probably very rewarding, but it also makes it quite difficult for scholars, for academics, socialized in a very traditional way. Then change intervention don't need to start from the scratch. There are already some good practices which may serve as models to learn from. And in almost every faculty, in almost every university, there are champions in the field you can tap, you can draw on their experiences, and you can benefit from what they already gained in this area. And finally, as with all fundamental change, both strong change management and change leadership is essential. If the topic is not high on the agenda, and if there are no change champions driving the processes, responsible leadership remains lip service without sustainable impact. It's not just a matter of change management, of designing new courses, for example, of just introduce it into programs. It's also a matter of change leadership. It has to be a priority on the dean's level and on the president's level of the university. At least it has to be facilitated in a visible way. If it's just handled as something, we must do that because society demands it from the university, it's too defensive. You have to have a very open-minded and very straightforward view of it. Finally, and that may be the major conclusion, new mindsets required. The issue of responsible leadership is urgent for university, as it is high on the agenda of stakeholders in society. So the train is approaching. You can't avoid it. The train is on the wheels and it's approaching. And university can't just continue their ways on existing wheels. So it's quite clear, the train is approaching. If you continue the way you did before, the end is at hand, as you see. So what is necessary? University have to explore new territories, and hopefully today's conference may be an important step for this. And in that sense, I would like to finish without ending this discussion, and I wish all of us a very exciting and interesting discussions in the coming workshops. Thanks for your attention.